Action.
The best Gran Turismo players in the world get a chance to compete in professional racing.
You really think you're going to take a kid who plays video games in their bedroom, you're going to strap him to a 200-mile-an-hour rocket? It'll tear him to pieces.
A film like this, which is an adaptation of a video game, but it's also an insane true story. How did it land on your desk, and where did you go from there?
I had written this other movie, which was like a darker dystopian science fiction film that I sold Sony, and we were in the process of looking for an actor for that film, and it was like a very particular actor that was taking a lot of time. And they said, hey, we have the script for Gran Turismo if you're interested in directing this. And I was like, what? That doesn't make any sense. You know, it's a racing simulator. It just literally doesn't make sense. And I almost wanted to read it just because I was curious. And then two things happened. The one thing is I've owned 3 Nissan GTRs in my life. Like I love the R35 GTR. And I also was struck by this idea of it being basically a biography, and that there was this whole true story GT Academy element to Gran Turismo that I'd never heard of. I just didn't know about it. And so I thought that was the coolest way to approach a video game film.
It's not going to work. The guys who race are elite athletes. Your kids are scrawny little gamer kids.
The more I read it, the more I started realizing that the movie had this positive sort of aspirational quality that reminded me of movies that I'd seen when I was a kid. That, you know, like the 13-year-old version of me coming out of a movie theater, having watched something like this movie, was the feeling that I wanted to try to emulate. And that had never crossed my mind in my life. Like from a directing standpoint, it was never on my radar. It was not a goal of mine. It just wasn't there. But all of a sudden, it was like there was a script that had cars, and it had this aspirational quality, and it was an interesting way to tell a video game story. So I was interested immediately, pretty much. And then when we got into production, the other thing that I really liked about it was, you know, everything that I've done before has been it's always required some form of world building in some way, because it's always been fantastical. And the complete, true kind of real life, everyday nature of the movie was a really cool production design challenge that I really enjoyed. I kind of want to make more real world films now because of it. So yeah, that's basically the history of me and the project.
Yeah, fantastic. And so as a guy who's owned Nissan GTRs, so you must be a bit of a car guy. And this is ultimately a racing film, and these days people are maybe a little bit more savvy about it because you know, Drive to Survive and stuff like that. They see a little bit more of what racing looks like, and so it's so important to this film. And the scenes are so visceral. I guess, what was your goal going into it, and what were the biggest challenges to realize that goal on the screen?
Yeah. Well, I am a total gearhead. I mean, I'm obsessed with cars, and you know, again, it was this really strange concept of like, well, obviously I should direct a car film given how much I love cars, but it honestly never crossed my mind. So as soon as I started thinking about, you know, how do we photograph them, and like what should we aim for with these race sequences? The other thing that I brought into it is FPV drone photography, because I love drones, and I've seen a lot of really interesting drone stuff, mostly in sports, actually, like X Games kind of sports. And so it was a combination of, let's try to make it as experiential for the viewer as possible. So like, make sure that we're in the cars with the drivers in a way that feels real, and then use drones to position the point of view of the audience in a way where hopefully his position in the race is kind of understandable, and the geography of the race is something that you can follow. And drones can be really helpful with that. And then just have very visceral ground-based photography, you know, with high-speed pursuit vehicles or lead vehicles that can really try to get as close to the cars as possible. And once you have all of that sort of that medley of photography, then you can focus on sound and try to really double down on, you know, really good sound design and make the car sound unique and sort of realistic, I guess.
It's just the major leagues.
The other drivers, your pit crew are going to hate you.
Much easier with a joystick, isn't it?
I can't see anything!
And was there, with those high-speed pursuit cars and drones and all of these moving pieces, were there some scenes where maybe there was some crashes that interrupted the proceedings? You
know, actually, weirdly, we were pretty lucky overall. We didn't really have many crashes at all. It was more. There were two things that were more difficult, I suppose. The one thing was I was obsessed with getting maximum speed, and it's much more difficult to do than it seems. It's not as it sounds easy that you go to a racetrack and then you just tell all the stunt drivers to just drive as fast as they can drive, but you know, there's so many things that have to happen in order for you to be able to hit maximum speed that I started realizing like just how big the ship is that you have to steer in order for that to eventually be able to happen. And we were also running up against things like you know, very cold track surfaces because we were getting close to winter, which is a dumb time to have shot the movie. And then mechanical failures, you know, like you'd have brakes overheating or engine, you know, some of the LMP2 cars are very finicky and they would overheat immediately, you know, like if you treat them correctly, they won't, but if anything is 1% off, you need like a team of technicians at the car for an hour, you know, or 2 hours, and it's like you've lost all of this time. So it was more of a logistics thing, a logistics headache than I was expecting. It's actually very difficult to shoot, but luckily no crashes.
Yeah, awesome. Well, tell me about the film that the guy that the film is based on, Jann Mardenborough, and then Archie Madekwe, who plays him. Tell me about those two guys and working with them on this project.
I mean, I really like both of them. They're both awesome guys. I think Archie he's so perfect for the movie, but he's physically very different from Jann. You know, Archie is ridiculously tall. He's like at least 6'5", and he actually had trouble fitting in the cars. Like we had to get custom seats and we had to do things to make him be comfortable because he's so tall. And he's physically different to Jann, but they both have a similar energy where they're very grounded and they're quite warm, kind of good people. And when I first met Archie over a Zoom, I could tell instantly that he should be the guy that plays Jann. And then I met him in person in London, and I instantly loved him.
I know what I'm doing. I'm not afraid. I've raced this track 1,000 times in the game. Let me drive it my way.
That was actually pretty great.
So he brought Jann to life, I think, in a really great way where the audience can invest, I think, in believing that this was a real guy that went through the stuff that he went through. And then on Jann's side, I would check with him constantly. Like I would always be texting him. I'd be like, how did this happen? You know, did it happen this way? How did you feel when this was happening? Like, or I would check other things with him, like kind of real world stuff. Like when he was in his parents' house, what kind of rig was he playing on? And then he'd send me photos like where he'd actually built that rig in one of his wood shop classes in high school. And we replicated that. Our art department rebuilt the rig that he used. So they're both awesome. I mean, I can't say enough good things about them.
Yeah, and then you've got Orlando Bloom, who is fantastic and just the right amount of earnest as a marketing executive for Nissan.
Yeah.
Tell me about working with Orlando.
It was cool working with Orlando. I mean, the thing that's really interesting is we both of us come from the same sort of way into working in the film industry, because we both went through the Peter Jackson school of filmmaking, and we both lived in Wellington in New Zealand to get into filmmaking. You know, so we had this kind of commonality that was awesome, and then he was also playing a part that is a real person. Like the real life guy is Darren Cox, who put together GT Academy, and like Archie, Orlando is quite different to Darren. Like they're quite different, but his performance, I think, is probably quite similar to him. So yeah, I had a totally good time working with him.
And then you've got David Harbour, who is just so perfect as a sort of the crotchety, wise old veteran race car driver who's kind of carrying some trauma of his own. What did you appreciate the most about David's performance on this film?
Well, David's really just awesome. I mean, he had a very particular, you know, his reference point was Hoosiers. He loves this movie, and he referenced it a lot, and he wanted this Gene Hackman kind of energy that, you know, at the end of the day, it was a case of like, you want to see him being very inaccessible and remote and sort of cut off. And then as time goes on and he starts to realize that this kid may actually have talent, and then eventually he kind of personally invests in him. It's cool to watch that happen. And so we spoke a lot about, like, you know, this arc of where he begins and where he ends. And he's just a really good actor who, you know, takes it seriously and is good to work with.
You think you can do the impossible. I'm here to prove that you can't.
You get tired, you get sloppy, you get hurt, and you lose races! You puked on my lawn.
And now I want to rewind a little bit. Many years ago, in another lifetime, I remember putting this unknown South African film, District 9, on the cover of a magazine that I was the editor of. And it felt like a lightning rod to the sci-fi genre. Like everything around that film, what did it feel like for you at the time?
It felt very personal. You know, I had worked on Halo for 6 months, which collapsed. And like I was just saying about being in Wellington the same way that Orlando was, I was in this kind of Weta, Peter Jackson, you know, Lord of the Rings neighborhood. I mean, it's literally like an entire neighborhood or like a suburb. And when Halo collapsed, I had time to think about what I really wanted to work on. And it was Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh that said, "What do you want to do?" You know, and I had already made this short film about xenophobia in South Africa, and I showed it to them, and they were like, "We should make that." And so it felt very personal. In fact, you know, we spent 8 months or 10 months writing the screenplay and just being locked up in Wellington, and I would spend all my days designing with the artists at Weta, and then I shot test footage and I showed it to Peter, and it included Sholto as the lead in the test, but I never thought that we could actually put him in the film. I wanted to, but I was like, I don't understand how someone who's never acted would be in the movie. And then Peter was like, you should put him in the film. And so it felt like a lot of good sort of decisions were being allowed to be made. And it was this very insular, kind of cut off from Hollywood approach, I think, that a film that weird could be made. So yeah, it just felt very personal, I guess.
And then Chappie, even more weird. I love that film. You're one of the few directors ever to make Hugh Jackman an asshole, which I think is wonderful.
And give him a mullet.
But before I let you, yeah. And so before I let you go, though, let's go back to Gran Turismo. Like you've had, you know, projects come and go in Hollywood. Like, I guess, what have you learned about the industry? And now, you know, coming back to Gran Turismo and putting this film out, like, how do you feel about making movies at this point in your career?
I feel good. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I exactly play by the same rules that, like, Hollywood expects me to play by. I kind of do what I want to do. And, I mean, I feel positive in the sense that there's something cool about working on a film that has an inherent optimism about it that's just different to stuff that I've done before. And I like that. I like the idea that there's some 13-year-old that will see it that will be inspired on some level, you know? And it's like my own stuff that I write and direct is usually more cutting. It's a different kind of thing. It's not exactly that kind of aspirational feeling. So if I'm 80, if I live that long, and I look back at films that I've directed, it's like I'm stoked to have done something that you could potentially have a bunch of people leaving the theater feeling this sense of traditional film optimism that reminds me of like just old school Hollywood sports films, you know. And it's like I really like that.
I lose more than just a race. So I'm not gonna quit.
You've got to prove to everyone that you belong.
You've raced it, what, like 1,000 times? Now you just gotta do it in real life.